Welcome, and please tell us who you are, tell us where you're coming from, who do you work for, and pop your questions in the chat. We're going to have a conversation today, me and Safia, about her book, Regenerative Fashion. And yeah, I'm very, very excited. Safia, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'm just going to say it is really, really lovely if you're happy to keep your videos on. But we are going to record the session because some people couldn't join live. So if you feel happy to keep your videos on, that would be absolutely lovely. Okay, so by means of introduction, I'm Safia Minney, founder of People Tree more than 30 years ago, and more recently, Real Sustainability and Fashion Declares, and also advisor at Business Declares. I'm really, really excited and happy to be with you today. And thanks so much, Rafa, for working with me to help introduce my recent work, or our recent work, I should say.
My pleasure. Yeah, so my name is Rafa, as you now know. I'm a sustainable fashion designer. I'm passionate about circular fashion systems and upcycling. And I came to know Safia through volunteering for Fashion Declares. If you don't know what Fashion Declares is, it's a bottom-up movement in the fashion industry to instigate change, positive change for a better fashion industry. We have 5 goals, which cover everything from the regenerative systems for the fashion industry to social responsibility, to governance and legislations. So I would like, well, today marks the anniversary, the sad anniversary of Rana Plaza incident, and I know that well, this event had a huge impact on everyone. I mean, I just watched it from distance, and it really broke my heart. And I know that it was also it has a similar impact on you, Safia. So if you can tell us more about that.
Sure, yeah. So 10 years ago, I was actually about to meet the executive director of the National Garment Workers Federation, and we would typically meet every 6 months. When I went to Bangladesh, and I was in Dhaka waiting for him, and he didn't turn up, which was extremely strange. I then left some 2 hours later, flew home to then land to find what had happened. So I'd missed the event. And I think, Rafa, what I'd love to do is to show everyone a really, really the beginning of a very short film that I made. So I went back 6 months later, and then also a year later to do my regular production visits and working with garment factory producers, and also with National Garment Workers Federation, but also with the fair trade groups that I'd partnered with for 20 years before that. And yeah, so I think it might be helpful just to kind of give a bit of the context to what happened 10 years ago with the beginnings of this short film. It features Karen Franklin, who's a great friend of mine and who is a leading fashion commentator and has been known very much for her work at the clothes show. So if it's acceptable, let me just see if I can share screen and move to the video that I'd love to show you.
Many workers stood outside and said they didn't want to go in, but they were forced to go in with the threat they would lose lose their monthly wages. Our favourite chain stores promise to give these people help, money and support, but there's only been a trickle. And it's your desire and my desire for cheap, fast fashion that is creating potential death traps for workers throughout Bangladesh.
So I'm going to stop there because you'll please do have a look at it. It's also on my Instagram, so if that's useful, please have a look. Sorry, have I stopped sharing my screen? I'm not quite sure. I have. I can't hear you, Rafa. You're off. Okay. Awesome. So, in the context, what I'd love to do, I joined remotely, of course, the press conference last week from National Garment Workers Federation. That was at the Press Club in Dhaka, and there were a number of speakers, including the Industrial Bangladesh Council, National Garment Workers Federation. And so what they reported was, of the 31 buyers, 19 buyers only contributed to the 5 factories, the victims, both of those that have been lost in the accident, the families that remain, and also compensation for those that were injured. There are still many buyers who did not contribute anything at all. So amongst them are Carrefour, Iconex, which is Lee Cooper and J.C. Penney, for example, amongst others. And what they're claiming is that this wasn't just tragedy or an accident, but a direct worker killing. They feel that because in 1990 there'd already been the Sarika fire, which had killed 27 workers, they feel that it's not sufficient to call this the turning point. That buyers, the fashion industry actually had plenty of opportunity to clean up its act. And you might wonder what happened to the factory owner. This was a chap called Sahel Rana, of course, Rana Plaza, Sahel Rana. He was put on bail. His bail was suspended, and there'll be a hearing on May the 8th in a month. So it's hoped by many of the garment factory workers and the unions that he will be punished, so that the irresponsible factory owners understand that this is totally unacceptable practice. So what's happened positively since the Rana Plaza, well, I'm going to call it tragedy because it is, certainly in Bangladesh, thanks to the Bangladesh International Accord and Alliance, many of the brands are going through it, they're registering with it, which means that garment factory owners, workers, governments and brands are working to new worker safety issues. And, you know, these are building regulations, electrical regulations to ensure, electrical safety to ensure that workers are safe. I mean, as you saw in the video, many people had seen the cracks opening up in the factory walls the day before and knew that something was happening. There was the awful incident where one of the workers said, look, take my savings because I'm really not sure if I'm going to be able to make it back. Other positives are that the numbers of trade unions within factories has increased significantly, and that's incredibly important. However, the flip side is that there's still a lot of subcontracting that is to the small, medium-sized enterprises, and so that is an issue. So what we need is ruling that works through the subcontracted smaller organisation companies as well. So the workers and the unions are still calling for the right to organise, the right to bargain, the right to strike. They're still concerned by the level of sexual harassment, which is due to discrimination within the workplace. Of course, more than 90% of garment factory workers are women, and the power that the bosses, who are typically men, have vis-a-vis them is huge and often exploited. So there is a call from the unions still to get more and more brands who are working in Bangladesh to sign to the international accord. So that's a quick summary of what was shared at the Dhaka press conference. So there's also a call for living wage, and you'd be shocked to know that even today only 50% of Bangladeshi garment workers receive minimum wage, let alone living wage. So we've got a long way to go. So I don't know, Ron, Rafa, if that answers your question, but that's a kind of update, as it were.
Yeah. What a horrible thing. I mean, really, and I know now there is also a call for other countries to do the same thing and to have
absolutely
to avoid similar tragedies and ensure living wage. I know that sustainable and fair fashion has been a personal journey for you, and for the past, I think, 30 years. And I just would like to know how did you get started? What was the motivation behind it all?
Good question. Well, I moved out to my background's in publishing.
I'm sorry, but the person you called isn't. Please leave your message after the tone.
Sorry about that. So I thought my background is in publishing and communications. I left for Japan with my husband at the time, and I suppose I was just the typical ethical consumer. I'd been buying, really bad fair trade coffee here 30 years ago. Lovely crafts from Tradecraft that's no more. But I was always in secondhand and charity shops, buying clothes. And I suppose I was very aware of the kind of the trade issues and how IMF and WTO were making it incredibly difficult for people in the global south to earn a living. And so I suppose as a consumer, I just thought, gosh, it would be great, wouldn't it, to have fair trade clothing, except that everything looked, really hippie-ish and not the kind of thing that I wanted to wear when I was, 26, 27 years old. So I started to work with some great designers in Japan, reaching out to fair trade groups in Bangladesh, India, Zimbabwe, Kenya, Nepal, Peru, and then started to design some products, which, it was very experimental. We were asking them two key questions. How did they think? Of course, these were fair trade organizations, but how were they thinking about the environment? What were they doing to protect the environment? Were they using low impact materials, natural dyes? How were they dealing with wastewater effluent, that kind of thing? And how were they using crafts? And then the second question we would ask is, how do women play a part in the organization? What was the voice of women? Were there women who were managers? What did they have in place? And I suppose that was really, for me, the two most important things. So we would ask them, what skills did they have? Maybe they had lovely hand weaving or hand embroideries or hand knitting, lovely block printing techniques. And then we would start designing products with them. We would do a sample order, and then we would sell them. Originally, we'd have little stands at festivals, and that kind of grew into the first shop, which is 25 years old in Tokyo. And then we started a wholesale business from there. And before we knew it, we had about 500 stockists around Japan. And then we started Europe in 2000. So, it was totally accidental. I'm not a fashion designer background like you, Rafa, so kind of admiring of that. But I suppose my grandmother was an embroidery designer. I've always loved crafts. So, I've loved kind of rummaging through charity shops and finding fabulous textiles and vintage, craft skills and that kind of thing. So I think, for me, it was always about, I'd love to spend, any disposable income I have on being part of the solution rather than the problem. And when you buy fair trade foods and organic foods, that's great. But the next step, I think, is, all the other parts. And of course, at that point, we couldn't buy renewable energy and, all of those kinds of things. But definitely a passion as one of the first generation of ethical consumers, I guess.
Yeah, I can't imagine. When I started becoming conscious about this, it was like 2015. So I did you feel like an outsider, or did you know that you were
like a maverick, like a bit of a weirdo? I did. I remember this journalist coming from the Nikkei Shimbun, like that's the equivalent of the Financial Times, I guess. And, he just asked me in a really rude manner, is this your hobby? And I just thought, oh, get lost. And it's like, but because, the idea of having said that, Japan is incredible, that craftspeople and artisans are really highly regarded, and there's a real appreciation of craftsmanship, which at the time in the UK really didn't exist. We'd kind of gone in the other direction. We wanted everything cheap and synthetic, and we'd forgotten about any kind of crafting technique. So I think I was extremely lucky that Japan was so appreciative of craft skill, but also, very, very collaborative. People were just, they would say, look, if you made this sock in this way, then it would sell better. Just marvelous customers. So that was really exciting. Yeah.
Amazing. I want to move closer now to the book that we're here to talk about. You have written 3 books before Regenerative Fashion.
Actually, about 9, but but there are the kind of the ones in English. Naked Fashion and Slow Fashion.
Yeah, and Slave to Fashion. Yeah, and so, as you said, you've been working on this for 30 years, and you've been having these conversations for a very long time now. So what's different what is different in regenerative fashion?
Well, I think the sense of emergency is strong. You know, what I'm saying is that we need a systems change within the fashion industry to be able to square the circle, as it were. And I mean, it feels very, very much that the work that we as a fair trade movement have been doing over the last 3-4 decades is actually more relevant today than ever before. Working with low impact materials like organic cotton and hemp and nettle and flax, etc., etc. But then using fair trade and generating livelihoods through that, transforming that fibre through knitting, through hand weaving, through hand embellishment. All of that is just because we're at this point now where we can't have a race to the bottom anymore. We have to reverse that. We have to regenerate soils, ecosystems, communities, and the biosphere. And the only way we'll do that is by reducing production and really shifting to what we produce as new, with a lot of value addition in it, which is where paying the farmers properly, but also paying the artisans properly for product and clothing that we really treasure is I think the only way forward. That is, I think, the just transition. So the book is very much about that reframe of where the fashion industry needs to go in the climate, ecological and social emergency.
Mm-hmm. And it was translated to Spanish and Japanese as well as English. So how come? Why Spanish and Japanese?
Okay, well, yeah, I've done my other books with New Internationalist. I love them. They're in Oxford. This book was with Laurence King, and they had the ability to translate and to work with international publishing houses. So it was a really great opportunity to have it in Spanish and Japanese to really broaden the reach. So that was really fun, really, really exciting.
Amazing. So the book is divided in 3 sections: nature, materials, people, and livelihoods and crafts, new economy and leadership. How did you come to this division?
Well, of course, everything is really interconnected. I'm very much a scientist also, so I do like structure. Having said that, I've always been a systems thinker. But so I started with nature and materials because I suppose, I've become increasingly shocked that the business, the fashion industry is so dependent on fossil fuels, and fossil fuels is 90% of greenhouse gas emissions. So clearly, what is underpinning the fashion industry, both in terms of the 2/3 of fabric that's made of fossil fuels, all the factories basically, and 99% of the factories in China, India, and Bangladesh are fueled by coal, and then of course even cotton, which we think of as a natural material, is all the pesticides and the fertilizers are petrochemical derived. So we have, and a distribution system of course as well. So we have we have this urgent need to shift to low impact materials, and with it the opportunity to pay farmers well and to grow in a regenerative and organic way, which could actually do incredible things to improve the resilience of soils in the climate emergency, whilst shifting away from fossil fuels. So yes, I started with low impact materials because I really feel that many of us in the fashion industry haven't really recognized how incredibly dependent we are on fossil fuels and how urgent that shift is. And of course, we're doing it with the food industry, but we haven't yet done it with fibers. And there's a question also about recycled polyester. If I go into a fast fashion chain, I'll find the majority of product is recycled polyester, 65 to 95% recycled polyester, made from PET bottles. And I think there's really an issue with that in terms of, it gets one wear and then, it can't be recycled again. So moving, I think, to low impact, certainly the monomaterial makeup, so everything in the product is the same material, so the whole thing can be collected and remade, alongside this shift, of course, to being much more about secondhand clothing. So, moving from 75 garments that the average UK citizen buys per year to perhaps 3 to 5 garments that are new. I think that's probably what we're looking at. And then I went on to discuss people and livelihoods, because for me, that's the just transition coming into play with the 70 million people that are working in fashion supply chains. We have to find decent livelihoods for farmers and for workers. And when I visited fair trade groups, the villages, the rural areas where often these fair trade groups are based, I can totally imagine myself, working there. If I were younger, when I had children, having my children there, the work shed, 5 minutes walk away, 10 minutes walk away. I just feel that whilst factories have become the norm, we have to be looking at more humanistic ways of really building livelihood and more human scaled production. And the last section, which is about the new economy and regenerative leadership, are looking at some of those obstacles that very much get in the way of redesigning the fashion industry to fit within planetary boundaries, because we are creatures of habit and we've got incredibly entrenched in a certain way of thinking. And I think, the openness, the curiosity, the kind of humility that will need to come from leaders, so that, everyone's ideas, all the stakeholders within a particular organization, from the employees that work in that organization to the suppliers, so that, we really are having proper, open, collaborative discussions about how we solve these problems and move forward. I believe that this is, the way to shift things at speed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and, I thought it was really important to include bigger scale in fashion businesses such as Chloe or Farfetch, and also, Patagonia is sustainable, but it's also it's huge, and so now it's a nonprofit. But it was very interesting to see how that applies when it comes to large companies. I wanted to ask you about, well, the first thing that you talk about in the book is planetary boundaries, and I wanted to ask you, how do you imagine the fashion industry, a fashion industry that operates within planetary boundaries? And I can try to.
Yeah. Firstly, the elephant in the room is that we cannot be producing 150 billion garments a year. And I've done a back of a napkin calculation of, how we get in 2035 to back to 35 billion garments. But that does mean, really shifting to consuming what we've already got on the planet, which exists already, the secondhand vintage pre-loved clothing. And then that new clothing being made from low impact materials that are fairly made. But if you could bring up the planetary boundaries image, I'd love to talk you through it, because I think for me it was really interesting to understand that obviously we know that the fashion industry is contributing arguably between 5 to 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. and that's set to rise to 25% by 2050 if it continues on the current trajectory. And this means, people everywhere in the world buying fast fashion like we buy fast fashion. I don't know, is it possible for you to show the image? Oh, fantastic.
Here it is.
Okay, awesome. So if you want to have a look at this, it's very, as you can see here, you've got the various planetary boundaries. These, if you see the biogeochemical flows where we're overshooting tremendously, the phosphorus and nitrogen, well, this would be from the fertilizers and the insecticides pesticides that are being used. So there's massive overshoot here. So we're contributing very much in this area with our production of conventional cotton, for example, and then in the area of land. So if we go clockwise round, fresh water use, it's said that 20% of water is being used for fashion and clothing and textile production. Land system change, obviously, there are issues there in conventional cotton growing, but again, how do we rein this in to really support small scale farmers with fair wages? And then when we come up to genetic diversity, well, obviously GM is a considerable impact and issue there. Novel entities there. This was actually called chemical pollution until quite recently, and now has become known as man-made pollution. So this would include, for example, microfibers and the different toxic compounds that we're using in the fashion industry, from the finishes we use on fabric to the dyes, right to those WHO banned chemicals that are being used in the agricultural process. So we can see here that we are in a dangerous space. I think we can probably take this down now. At the moment, most of the scientific studies say that we're around about 2.8 degrees above pre-industrialized levels. Some reports suggest that we might get to 7 degrees above. So we are at a catastrophically urgent and dangerous spot, really, at this point of just before midnight, where we absolutely have to change the way every industry and sector operates, not just the fashion industry. Sorry, I've rather gone off the point, I think. Sorry, Rafa.
You are right on it, because I wanted to ask you about the role of degrowth in kind of moving away from this issue.
Yes, well, as I mentioned, I think we need to be cutting from the average number of garments people would throw away per year is 75. We need to come back to buying, as few as 5 or so new garments each year. And people will say, is that a pair of socks, or do we count socks as 2? And is that underwear, or what is it? But I think a huge shift towards secondhand is the direction that we clearly need to go. And degrowth. There are a number of organisations within the fashion space that are also doing some incredible work, recognising that degrowth is alongside the impact that it's having on the fast fashion is having on the global south. When we look at the dumping of clothing, only 1% is recycled. I think there's a huge and urgent need beyond the planetary boundaries, just in terms of looking at social justice to really reframe the fashion industry. I will have a look at the see if I can find my back of a napkin calculation, if that could be useful to you.
Yeah, definitely. And I wanted to ask you, there are multiple examples that businesses working with either reusing material or reselling, supporting the secondhand and recycling industry. So what were the ones that stood out for you? What were the ones that you really connected with?
Well, I suppose that those that I intimately know and would be some of the fair trade organisations, those that or those that are growing organic cotton and then transforming the fibre into a hand-woven fabric, often adding an embellishment, like Oshadi, for example. I wrote a bit about there was an interview with Kumbheshwar Technical School in Nepal, who do amazing work with hand knitting in the Kathmandu Valley. I think I learned a lot from interviewing many of these organisations, just the ambition also of some of these organisations. I remember one of the founders of 5P in India saying, if every fashion brand switched just 1% of its buy to hand woven, we could lift the poverty level of $1.5 a day to $4 a day. And I thought, well, really, there is no shortage of ambition and no shortage of solutions. I think another one that I was excited about was, I was excited about them all actually, but Reverse Resources, which is an initiative run by Nin Castle. I know she's been piloting it in Bangladesh, but again, using factory waste, sorting it to create livelihoods out of that waste, which was very exciting. But yes, no shortage of very exciting businesses that are already working on aspects of regenerative fashion, whether that be, the material side or the livelihood side or the activism, the regenerative leadership side. Certainly no shortage of businesses already showing those pathways forward to a different future for the fashion industry.
Well, moving to the current moment, I'm helping you with your great work on Fashion Declares, and on Friday we were outside of the Trade and Business Department with 100 or so fashion leaders calling for action in the climate, ecological and social emergency. Can you tell me more about that?
Yes, it was very exciting. We came together, a number of different organisations and fashion activists behind the banner of Fashion Declares. So we were outside the Department of Business and Trade, asking them for regulation and policy and a framework so as to support businesses to do the right thing within the fashion space. Also a fashion watchdog. If you have a look at my LinkedIn, you'll see the press release if you'd like more details. The fashion action, of course, as we're fashion people, was quite creative. So we were full of little outfits with patches on the Fashion Declares goals. They speak out for urgent action, for example, goal to decarbonize, restore ecosystems and diversity. Goal 3, ensure social justice and a just transition. And goal 4 of Fashion Declares, demand radical transparency and reform corporate governance. Goal 5, which is champion regenerative systems. So we had 15 speakers. Again, you can find them on Fashion Declares or my Instagram. We're also making a short film, really, really powerful talks from leaders within the movement, from Belle Jacobs, who was fashion editor at Metro, to Karen Franklin and Hilary Marsh at Transform Trade and many others. So it was a really, really powerful day. Our hope is that with more than 350 businesses that were involved in the big one, which was the event that is just finishing, well, it's finishing today, in front of Parliament, with tens and tens of thousands of people, and more than 350 organisations also that were involved, that we've made it extremely clear to the government that we need an end to new fossil fuel licenses. We need frameworks that will deliver the climate action, which is in line with the climate emergency, which was declared in 2019. So yeah, so let's hope. But again, this is, again, we'll know what kind of steps will next need to happen should government inaction continue. Rafa, I have found my back of a napkin calculation. I wonder if you'd like me to share it with you.
Love that. Thank you.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes. If you can make it like full screen, then we can see it better.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I got myself rather lost. Oops. I'm so sorry. I'm not quite sure.
So
can you see it now?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so here we are with 150 billion new garments in this year, with the majority which is unethically produced and a tiny section of ethical here, with a second-hand rental, recycle, repair, etc. here. So let's envisage that by 2025, we have regulation in place which starts to choke out the unethical business practice that built on modern day slavery and using fossil fuels exclusively, so that we have an increase in ethical, and secondhand and recycled is growing. By 2030, let's say that we were reliant, we cut the production of new to 60%, to 60 billion, which is less than half what we have now, with the half of it being secondhand, and again, ethical becoming a larger proportion of the total of new. So by 2035, we would be cutting overall production of new down to 35 billion, mostly reliant on secondhand, but with the new being produced and the majority ethical, I don't think we'll choke off all of the unethical products. But then again, with the craft made coming through in a significant proportion, to the words of the 5P group, really encouraging people to use handwoven and different craft techniques. I hope that makes sense.
It does. It's, fingers crossed, right? I mean, and hopefully we can, everyone can come together and we can achieve those goals. I thought we could open for some questions from the audience. If anyone has any questions, please write them in the chat and we will try to answer them. So Eve has a comment question. No, it's a question. Could do no harm and due diligence policies be used more actively?
I think the EU environment and human rights due diligence will be very effective if it's properly enforced. And if businesses are exporting to Europe, which the majority of large ones would, they will have to have the transparency, and they will have to have the documentation in place to prove that they are properly taking these factors into account. So I think it's a very, very powerful tool. There seems to be a threshold of, I think it's 30 million turnover or more, below which you don't need to enforce it. So I'm rather unsure as to whether it's acceptable for SMEs not to qualify for it. I would imagine that if you were 10 million or more, there would be no excuse whatsoever to complying with it, would be my feeling. Mm-hmm. That answers your question.
Until someone else. Oh, yes, please. If you can unmute, that would be great. We can't hear you.
Yeah, got it. Done it before. Hi, Safia. You may not know my name, but I have written to you a few times. I'm chairman of the Fair Trade Jersey, and when I started in 2004, within 2 or 3 years, we'd held 4 People Tree fashion shows, which was so exciting and really sort of gave us a sense of purpose. And also we were integrating then with people of all generations, but particularly young people. And regenerative fashion is my bedside reading.
Oh, thank you.
What I'd really like to say is I'm actually going to retire as chairman this year after 18 years. And I'm really keen to go out with something very memorable. And I have written and asked a couple of times if you would consider coming over to Jersey. We had such a big audience of enthusiastic young people. We had terrific communication with local media, BBC Radio Jersey and the local newspaper. We had direct access to all the important politicians in Jersey. That I feel that if you could find some time sometime, we would be able to have a really big impact on getting people to think about regenerative fashion. We don't have fashion producers over here, but I think things start really, the desire starts with the people who are out buying things. It's the same with fair trade generally. So if we ask for fashion to be more regenerative, then it really starts to get things going. So I've taken advantage of the fact that you and I are in the same room, and I hope you'll give some thought perhaps to that request if I send it in again.
Well, thank you, Tony. If you don't mind inviting me down and covering my train fare in a night, I'd be very, very happy to come down if it's in the summer and help you with any organisation of an event or speaking or I would love to meet. I'd love to meet the community locally. It would be a lot of fun. Thank you.
We'd be very excited to see you. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Tony.
Amazing. I had a question. It's about offsetting. Asad Rahman, the director of War and Want, I'm quoting him from the book, said that offsetting is carbon colonialism. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yes, I mean, carbon insetting is the way to go. I mean, there are so many opportunities to decarbonize the supply chain. I mean, we've talked about switching to low impact materials away from synthetics, by ensuring that you have a what we call a critical path in fashion, so that you plan so that the production can come in by sea freight as opposed to air freight is an obvious one. For smaller brands, certainly they still use air freight way too much. There are so many opportunities, but it comes through partnering. And I think what's been music to my ears this last year and a half is that increasingly fashion organizations that are championing change are realizing that it's the buying practices, or we could say further the trading practices, that are actually undermining the speed of environmental and social innovation. So clearly, if a buyer is saying, I want to buy this pair of trousers at the same price as 3 years ago, and I want it produce more quickly, and oh God, COVID's just broken out, so I'm going to cancel the order, or I'm going to put it on hold for 6 months. That it is impossible in those circumstances to deliver human rights and an environmentally sustainable product. So what was exciting interviewing the many designers and fashion companies that are there in regenerative fashion is that they've all found ways of working very, very closely with the suppliers in their supply chain. They consider each other part of the same family. Only through working collaboratively can they deliver the level of innovation, the kind of product that increasingly customers want, and in fact investors want to see too. So I think he's absolutely right. I have huge respect for War and Want, and Assad is he's absolutely correct. Yeah.
We have one more question. Clara Beth is saying that I imagine that most brands are resistant to adopting these regenerative systems. Have you found that there are certain tactics to help encourage a brand to improve their practices, perhaps through legislation or otherwise?
Large fashion businesses should be adopting science-based targets. So writing to your favorite brand, if it's a large business, and saying, what are you doing? Where is your climate action plan? Having a look. I know we discussed, Rafa, you and I, the Fashion Revolution, Transparency Index, and Remake have gone, one step on from that to really hold fashion businesses accountable. Fashion Declares is also putting the expertise around the 5 goals that I showed you earlier. We've got those seminars and expert webinars up on YouTube. So I think there's no excuses now for fashion businesses not to make that transition. I think the regulatory framework is incredibly overdue. And it's absurd to expect voluntary codes to deliver the kind of change that we need at the speed that we need it. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. We have we're coming up on time, but we have another question asking about pre-consumer waste. That saying that 80% of environmental impact is locked at the design stage. Recycling fashion and secondhand clothing can be addressed to post-consumer waste. What about pre-consumer waste? What can you suggest to emerging and young designers?
I think a lot of designers are using dead stock. So I've been excited to see some designers using zero waste pattern cutting. I think there are lots of new and mainstreaming techniques that are kind of coming up. I think just really discovering, and Rafa, you and I were talking about this earlier, rediscovering, the intrinsic value of material. When we were, screen printing and onto hand woven fabric, I was cutting out and wasting fabric, and I whilst I'm mindful that it's organic cotton and it's been hand woven, it could probably go in my compost heap. I think really when one, experiences fabric and then thinks, it's the waste is going to go somewhere, you have a very different relationship with it. And I think also there are organizations that are trying to reconnect designers back to nature and how those fibers are produced, like Fibershed, for example, with their amazing work in initiating kind of localization, linking fiber production with local making. I think all of these initiatives are extremely valuable because they teach us a new way of thinking about nature and really appreciating that our current system is broken and that we have to design new, proper, circular systems, but ones that also put food on the table for farmers and for artisans throughout the supply chain.
Yeah. And the stories that really resonated with me were stories of designers that went back to work directly with indigenous artisans, that these ancient ways of doing things that doesn't waste, because coming by the material and that they work with is they put a lot of their heart and soul and energy, and so we can learn so much from going back.
Yeah, absolutely. There is the issue that, of course, fashion is mostly large businesses, and somehow we have to get these large businesses with tens and tens of thousands of employees and teams that are all working in silos to work together to deliver decarbonization, to manage a just transition. So I suppose I adore small craft and the smaller brands that are working with indigenous people and natural materials and crafting techniques. But I'm also extremely mindful that these are examples of methodology that needs to be brought into large organizations to really shift their buying practice. So we can't only have smaller brands move. We need the large ones to really step up to the change.
Yeah, I felt like a very good quote was from Kate Fletcher, who imagined that the future of the fashion industry is a multiplicity of different initiatives, that we kind of need to work on all of the fronts for different ways that work for different sizes and different locations.
Absolutely.
So the last question I have here is, where is the best place to buy your book online, or, for example, independent booksellers?
Yes, gosh, that's something I hadn't prepared for. On my Safia Minney website, there's a blog which introduces the book, and it gives a list of places where you can buy it. You don't just have to buy it from the A Word. You can buy it, from independent booksellers, which is always my preference. And of course, if you wait for a bit, you might also pick up a copy secondhand. But yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me to talk to you about regenerative fashion. It's been a real joy and privilege to interview close to, it must have been about 100 different designers and people within the fashion industry to understand how they were responding in the climate, ecological and social emergency. And there's clearly no shortage of solutions. It really is about action now and creating those frameworks for genuine systems change and law enforcement.
Well, thank you for your time and for sharing all of these stories with us. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and hope to see you with us. So if you are working in the fashion industry, please join us in Fashion Declares. If you are a citizen that would like to do something, go to Real Sustainability, and we'll see you again soon, I hope. Thank you, Safia.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining, everyone.